most Americans really find out who's won elections, or in the case of a presidential contest, who's won particular states, from calls or projections made by TV networks like yours on election night or even later. Um, could you sort of briefly explain how the decision desk process works and the kind of models and data they deploy to make their decisions?
Sure. Yeah. No, there's a team here, a unit here at NBC, MSNBC. It's the same team for all NBC News operations, and other networks have basically the exact same thing. And they are. I think the first thing to know about them is they have a degree of independence that you don't usually see in a news organization, which is to say it is their call and their call alone, and ultimately about whether to call a state. So every time a state is called or an election is called, they have made that decision. They have the power. I think this is just written into how they operate. That a producer, an executive, anybody on the editorial or business side can't come in and overrule them. They get to make that call, and it's vitally important, just given all the pressures that come into play on different election nights. What they're doing is, a lot of it has to do with modeling in any given state. You start looking at get your early vote that comes in. You've got sort of key precincts that you're looking for, or just any precinct in general that comes in. You can kind of match it up demographically with other precincts in the state, and you can look for patterns and look for trends. Or really, the model is looking for patterns and it's looking for trends, and it's looking for, okay, here's a county that Donald Trump won by 10 points in 2016, and tonight he's only won it by 2 points. And here's 10 other counties that are very demographically similar, and the same trend is evident there. And meanwhile, here's 10 where Biden's doing significantly better than Clinton. And once it starts, the more vote that you get in, the more vote that kind of gets fed into the system, the more confident the model is going to get, and the more the decision desk kind of will work its way up to making a call. And they have a very specific statistical threshold that the model has to meet, that their projections have to meet for them to make that call. And in an election year like this, they've been very clear. If it takes 2 hours to reach that threshold, they'll wait 2 hours. If it takes 2 weeks to reach that threshold, they'll wait 2 weeks. But when the threshold is met, the state is called.
Well, that leads right up to my next question. What's unusual about this election? Well, one of the things that's unusual is the very high percentage of the vote that's being cast by mail, and a huge partisan split in terms of which voting methodology people prefer, with Democrats disproportionately voting by mail and Republicans disproportionately wanting to vote on Election Day in person. And that has a lot of implications for decision desks, since you're not going to capture those mail ballot voters with exit polls the way you are in-person voters. And it also means, because states have all these wildly varying rules on how long they can accept mail ballots and when they can start processing, counting, and reporting them. So it just creates a very different sort of landscape for when we know the results. I gather decision desks look at pre-election polling to get a handle on mail ballots, but in general, how do you think this new situation affects the timeline for calling states?
Yeah, I mean, there's the potential for some very slow counting states here, and if they're looking very close, it could be drawn out. Pennsylvania goes right to the top of the list there. Michigan's another that could be. One thing I would say is exit polling is going to be a little different this year because of what you're describing. So we're still going to have the traditional exit polling where, we've got this army of folks going to precincts around the country, interviewing people who are there same day, election day, who are voting in person. But what's also taking place right now is states that have extensive early or mail-in voting, telephone polling is taking place. And it's on a scale that just dwarfs any, if you look at a random NBC poll that comes out on the state of the race, there might be 800 people in that or something. We're talking tens of thousands of people here. People, verified voters, people we know have voted. They're being contacted now in the states that have the most extensive mail-in and early voting. It's something that, and it's a national election pool that's doing this, sort of a media consortium. So they provide data for us. They provide data for some other media outlets as well. You're going to have, an exit poll that has that early mail component to it in a way we've never seen before. So that's going to be there. That can inform you, I think it's more useful for sort of after the fact. Once you know who won a state, you can get some good demographic information from that. Oh, this group went this way, that group went that way. But that can inform some of the initial thinking about what to be looking for when the vote comes in. But ultimately, the call is going to be made on the vote that comes in. And yeah, I mean, I think it's the challenge for me just being on the air as the decision desk works through all of this. The challenge that I'm anticipating that I've never anticipated before is being very aware in any given state of the vote we are now showing on the screen. Biden's leading by 10, let's say, in some state, being very clear that, okay, that is mail-in ballot, for instance. And telling people, look, we knew the mail-in vote was going to be heavily Democratic. So what you're seeing here is probably Biden's high water mark. And the question now in this state is, as that same day vote comes in and gets tabulated, how much of that lead can Trump eat into? Can he eat into all of it, or is he going to fall short? But be looking for Trump-friendly numbers the rest of the way. That's the kind of story, that I want to be ready to tell. And it's going to vary by state. There are going to be some states where it's the Democratic vote that's late. Pennsylvania is a good example. There are going to be some states where the Republican vote is late. I think Florida will fall into that category. But it's just, that's a thing doing these election nights, I've never really had
Nobody has
before. Yeah, it's central to the story now.
Now, I'd have to ask a hypothetical about a state you've mentioned 3 times, Pennsylvania. That's a state that where by state law, they're not even allowed to look at mail ballots until election day. And they've indicated they're not going to report any mail ballot data until at least the day after. Okay. What that means is that the president's going to have very likely a pretty robust lead in Pennsylvania, because what we're going to see on election night is going to be mostly election day votes, which are going to skew Republican. So you're on the decision desk and you're looking at the screen, and Trump has a 10-point lead in the raw vote, but your model is telling you that when all these mail ballots are ultimately counted, Joe Biden's going to win by 10 points. That's the hypothetical. Do they go ahead and call it for Biden, even though it contradicts those raw votes on the screen, or will they wait for the vote count to catch up to the model, maybe a day or two later?
Yeah, I don't think there's a hard and fast rule on that, I would say. But I would say if you get to a situation, so I think what's going to happen in a state like Pennsylvania is it's going to be some counties, and it looks like this is predominantly rural, smaller Republican counties, are saying ahead of time, we're not touching the mail-in votes till the next day. The 2 big counties I know, or cities, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, have said they are going to process and report out as many mail ballots as they can on election night. And my sense is what that probably means in real terms in a city like Philadelphia, you'll probably get just about all the same day vote reported out, and maybe about half of the mail-in votes.
Oh, okay.
So if you're looking at, let's say, 450,000 mail-in ballots that get cast in Philadelphia total, let's just kind of ballpark it. If we saw 200,000 of those reported out, 225 reported out on election night, and then the other 200, 225 take the next 2 or 3 days to get out, it wouldn't shock me, because basically the variable here is nobody can open it in Pennsylvania till the morning of the election. But then the question is, does the county want to devote resources during the day on election day to processing them? And different counties, you can read into it whatever you want. Different counties are making different decisions on that. But it's a long way of saying, I think in a state like Pennsylvania, what my expectation is yes, the night of, Trump's going to hit his high water mark in Pennsylvania. Yeah. Next day and 2 days later, it's going to get more and more Democratic. Well, it may not be as extreme though. And it may be a point where, again, this is purely hypothetical, but like if Biden got ahead and you could clearly see that what was to come was just the rest of the mail-in vote in Philadelphia, where you've already established that the mail-in vote in Philadelphia is going, 80-20 one way. I think it makes the kind of scenario you're describing a little less fraught.
Okay, well, let's hope we know something by election night, and you can watch Steve and his colleagues on MSNBC's election night coverage beginning at 4 p.m. Eastern time.